Hello everybody, we are going to cover 8.4, which is about rational expressions. Our goal in this section is to simplify rational expressions. What does it mean to be in simplest form? A rational expression is in simplest form when its numerator, which is the top of the fraction, and the denominator, the bottom of the fraction, are polynomials that have no common divisors. So you can see two examples that are already in simplest form, and then you have three examples off to the right that are not in simplest form, so you would need to simplify those. You simplify a rational expression by dividing out the common factors in the numerator and the denominator. Notice that word factor there. So all of our factoring from Algebra 1 is going to come back here. Factoring the numerator and denominator will help you find those common divisors. So our first step is to always factor the numerator and denominator if possible. And then if any of the factors are the same, you can cancel those out. And that's how we would simplify these rational expressions. So let's look at three examples together. Example 1 says, what is the rational expression in simplest form? And then state any restrictions on the variable. Looking at A, we have 24x cubed y squared over negative 6x squared y cubed. We can look at this in three parts. Looking at the coefficients, first, 24 divided by negative 6 gives us negative 4. Since it's just negative 4, you can think of that as negative 4 over 1. So our negative 4 is going to be on our numerator. Then looking at our base x. So we have x cubed over x squared. You learned back in Algebra 1 that the quickest way to simplify a rational expression like this, where it's x cubed over x squared, is to subtract those exponents. So if we're dividing with the same base, we can subtract the exponents. So x cubed over x squared becomes x to the 3 minus 2. And that's just a 1. So it's just x to the first power, which we don't need to write the first power. And then we have y squared over y cubed. So again, we're going to subtract. The y cubed is on the denominator. So it's going to be 3 minus 2, but that exponent of 1 will be on the denominator there. One way you can think of that is if you have 2 y's up top, 3 y's on the bottom. If you cancel 2 of them out, you're still going to have 1 y on the denominator. So here is our simplified answer, negative 4x over y. When it asks you to state any restrictions on the variables, what we're worried about there is our denominator being 0. So what variables will make the denominator 0? Those are the ones that we need to restrict, or the ones that we need to say cannot be a part of the solution. To find that out, we're always going to look at the denominator of the original. So we're looking at negative 6x squared y cubed. Think to yourself, what number, if I substitute it in for x on the denominator, will make the whole denominator 0? Well, if x is 0, then the entire denominator will be 0. Now let's look at y. What number, if I substitute it in for y, will make the whole denominator 0? Again, if I substitute 0 in for y, the whole denominator will be 0. So we need to state that both x and y cannot be 0. And that will be our restriction on the domain for this rational expression. Because if the denominator is 0, then it is not defined. So those would be our restrictions on the domain. X and y cannot be 0. Okay. Let's look at B. X squared plus 2x minus 8 over x squared minus 5x plus 6. Here's one where we can actually factor to help us to simplify. Looking at the numerator, we need numbers that will multiply to give us negative 8 and add to give us 2. So our numbers that will multiply to negative 8 and add to 2 would be 4 and negative 2. Remember, you can always multiply back out to see if you factored correctly. And then on our denominator, we want to factor x squared minus 5x plus 6. So we're looking for two numbers that will multiply to give 6. And at the same time, those two numbers will add to give negative 5. So the two numbers that will multiply to 6 and add to -5, or -3 and -2. So now we factored the numerator and the denominator, and you'll see that that allows us to simplify. There's an x minus 2, a factor of x minus 2 on both the numerator and the denominator. So if you divide x minus 2 by x minus 2, it becomes a 1. So those cancel. And we're left with x plus 4 divided by x minus 3. So that's our rational expression in simplest form. The biggest mistake that I see some of the time is people will try and simplify this even further and be like, oh look, there's an x and an x. Those aren't factors. We're adding x to 4 and then we're subtracting 3 from x. Okay, we're not multiplying x by 4, so you cannot cancel those x's out. Do not do that. That's a big mistake that I see often. And then we need to look at what our restrictions of the domain would be. So looking at the original denominator, x squared minus 5x plus 6, which ended up giving us x minus 3 times x minus 2. We want to see what values, when we substituted in for x on the denominator, would make the whole denominator 0. Okay, so if we're looking at x minus 3 times x minus 2, that denominator, when we factored it, the x value of 3, if we substituted in right here, and I'll do it in orange, if we put a 3 right here, that would make that 0, which would make the whole denominator 0. So we need to eliminate 3 or exclude 3. And then also if I put a 2 right here in for that x, we would get 2 minus 2, which is 0. So we need to also restrict our domain by saying it cannot be 2. So we need to restrict our domain to not be 3 and to not be 2. That's what would make our original denominator of the rational expression 0. And then on C, we have 12 minus 4x over x squared minus 9. Now both the numerator and the denominator will factor here. The denominator is a difference of squares, so it factors to be x plus 3 times x minus 3. Our numerator here, notice that your x value is negative, so you want to think of factoring out a negative here. And in fact, we're going to factor out -4 would be our GCF. So if you factor out -4, we're left with x minus 3. And notice I switched the terms there. I'll just write it up above right here. -4 times, you get 3 plus x. If you keep them in the same spot, -3 plus x. And then I just switched the positions of -3 and x to get the x minus 3. Since addition is commutative, we can do that. Now we're ready to go ahead and simplify. We have a factor of x minus 3 on numerator and denominator here. So this simplifies to be -4 over x plus 3. Another way of writing that would be to have the negative out in front of the fraction, so those mean the same thing, just in case you happen to see it one or the other way. Those both mean the same. As far as the restriction on the domain, if we're looking at the original denominator of x squared minus 9, that factored to be x plus 3 times x minus 3. If we substituted -3 in for that first x, it would make the denominator 0. And if we substituted 3 in for the second x, it would make the denominator 0. So we need to restrict the domain of this rational expression by saying that x cannot equal to -3 or 3. If you want to write that as plus or minus 3, that's totally fine. So either one of these would be a perfectly simplifying answer. Go ahead and try the got it. So same question, just try C, E, and F, and then go ahead and pause this. Okay, so looking at D, E, and F now. 9, a to the 4th, b to the 7th over 18, a squared, b to the 9th. 9 over 18 reduces to be 1/2. So that's where that 2 on the denominator comes from. A to the 4th over a squared. If you do a to the 4th minus 2, you get a squared on the numerator. B to the 7th over b to the 9th. You're going to have more b's on the denominator, so your base b will be on the denominator, and the 9 minus 7 gives you that exponent of 2. If a and b are 0 in the original expression, it would make the whole denominator 0, so you need to exclude those from the domain. On E, the numerator factors to be x plus 5 times x plus 2, and the denominator factors to be x minus 5 times x plus 2. The x plus 2's will cancel, so your simplified rational expression is x plus 5 over x minus 5. We need to exclude negative 2 and 5 from the domain. And then on F, the denominator was already factored for you, so we're going to keep it. The numerator, notice that your negative is in front of your x squared term, so we're going to factor out a negative, which switches the signs of every term. So if we factor out that negative, it becomes x squared minus x minus 6. X squared minus x minus 6 factors to be x minus 3 times x plus 2. Leave that negative out in front for now. We can simplify. There's an x minus 3 factor on the numerator and the denominator. So this becomes negative x plus 2 over x plus 7. And then your original denominator of x minus 3 times x plus 7, if you were to substitute 3 in and negative 7 in, both of those would give you a 0 on the denominator, so you need to exclude those from the domain. That is it for this section for simplifying rational expressions. So go ahead and get that assignment done and turned in on Wednesday. I hope you're all doing well.